afternoon, everybody. Happy day 43 of the apocalypse, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today we're taking a break again from our usual format for a bit of a roundtable discussion, this time on the hellscape forming on the other side of the Atlantic, with the Mirror's political bigwigs there in Parliament, Lizzie Buchan and Mikey Smith. Afternoon, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, everyone, so don't forget, ask us your comments, get into the questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening on podcast will just have to start hoarding spam. Right, so what have we got for you today? Well, predictably, whatever we were planning to discuss when we arranged this chat has been exploded by all the diplomatic hand grenades that are being lobbed over the Atlantic by Donald Trump. It seems to be a never-ending barrage that makes the average news week seem like a year on a roller coaster. But let's just try to recap a bit for those who've forgotten exactly what's happened. Now, Lizzie, you were in Washington last Thursday, not even a week ago, with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and he was the second European leader to meet Trump at that point, and it all seemed to go quite well, didn't it?
Yeah, it feels like a million years ago. I flew out with the PM on his visit to the White House, so we went Wednesday night and the meeting was on Thursday. And yeah, it all went to plan. I mean, there'd been months and months of trying to kind of build this diplomatic relationship between Starmer and Trump. There'd been lots of kind of back channel communication, diplomatic efforts to try and make sure that they could smooth the way. And the meeting, you know, by all accounts, went pretty well. I mean, we were sort of hanging around outside, and then we got ushered into the Oval Office to stand at the back and watch the top of the meeting, which was an incredible experience. And Trump and Starmer were sort of sat alongside each other, and Trump looked very relaxed, but Starmer looked a little bit tense. Then he whipped out this letter from the King offering Trump this second state visit, and that seemed to kind of break the ice a bit. Trump was clearly delighted by the fact that he was getting this unprecedented second invitation. And then they took a lot of questions from the media. It was all quite friendly. Trump, you know, was really praising Starmer, kept talking about the strength of the UK relationship. And while Starmer didn't manage to get what his main aim of the trip was, which was to try and get the US to commit to a security guarantee for any peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, everything was looking good. And when we left Washington, PM got on the plane, popped his head in to see all the journalists, and we asked him, you know, how he thought it went, and he said happy, gave a big thumbs up, and then disappeared. And then, you know, everything hit the fan.
Yeah. I can just see Mikey's sort of cynical eye roll next to you there. So the atmosphere in the Oval Office was quite good. He didn't get quite what he wanted, but it seemed to be as successful a trip as you could really hope for. And of course, the next day, barely giving time for the wheels to touch down and everyone to get over their jet lag, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Washington. And if anybody has blocked out the memory of what happened with that, here's a little clip just to refresh you of how it all went a little bit EastEnders for him.
You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
Gosh, it was just painful just watching it again. Lizzie, was there any hint while you were in Washington? I mean, obviously everything sort of hangs on this sort of knife edge, doesn't it, of Trump's mood and his whim, and you never know where he's going to go. But was there any hint that all this delicate diplomacy that Starmer and before him Emmanuel Macron have been doing might just go out the window, that it was at risk in some way?
I don't think anyone was expecting things to go as badly as they did. I think there was a bit of nervousness about the meeting. Obviously, Trump and JD Vance have both been quite critical of Zelensky publicly. And Trump was asked in the Oval Office when I was there, why did you call, you know, Zelensky a dictator? And he claimed that he didn't remember saying that. He sort of said, oh, did I say that? Really? Next question. Which sort of suggested to us at the time that he was trying to kind of, he wasn't going to apologize for it, but he was kind of putting it to one side for a little bit. So I think there was some there was hope that maybe enough diplomatic work had been done to at least bring Trump back from the brink. I don't think anyone was really sure that, because Starmer wasn't able to get the US security guarantee, I think there was a nervousness that it could, that the US wasn't where the UK and European leaders wanted it to be. But I don't think there was any sense that it was going to go as badly as it did.
No, everyone was taken a bit by surprise, including Zelensky. Now, Mikey, before all this sort of toing and froing that was going on, you were in the States as well for CPAC, so this conservative fundraising sort of convention, bit of a meeting with the Donald Trump fan club, where the MAGA world comes together and talks about stuff that seems absolutely farcical and mad, and then suddenly becomes government policy, and we all have to cope with it. Was there any undercurrent? Was there any talk on the ground there, sort of from the MAGA base, that about the war in Ukraine and how that's playing with them?
I mean, there was certainly talk from the stage of it. It started with Elon Musk made a surprise appearance on stage. You may have seen him running around with a chainsaw, which was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen with my two eyes. But I thought the key bit of his appearance was when he was asked about Ukraine, and he started talking about Zelensky being a crook and loads of money being missing and him throwing people into a meat grinder for cash. Earlier the same day, JD Vance had actually opened the show, and he'd been sort of he'd been very JD Vance about it. And before that, even before I think this all, so the clues started from a few days before that JD Vance's speech in Munich, where he's saying, "All right, Europe, you've got to kick in," and that's where sort of the clues started that JD Vance was going to do this, because it was him who started it in the Oval.
Yeah.
I don't think Trump would have gone there in the meeting had JD Vance not have started it. And I mean, there's every indication that it was he sat down planning to do that.
Yeah. We'll get on, I suppose, a bit to Vance as we go through this and what he's playing at. But what about the base, the people who are attending these events and listening to these guys? I mean, they may have absorbed some of the stuff they've said about Ukraine, but the mood on the ground amongst the foot soldiers, do they really care about Ukraine? Or are they just...
I don't think for many of them it's why they voted for Donald Trump. I don't think his position on I'm not even sure they knew his position on Ukraine when they voted for him. It was... So CPAC's a weird thing. So the closest thing I can compare it to is, do you remember what UKIP conference used to be like?
No, I've always avoided them, but I can make a wild stab. So, yes, yellow trousers, strange chips.
Yeah, so there's a solid core of sort of slightly hiding racists in there, but around them there's lots of fruitcakes and loonies. So there were lots of people dressed up as, there were a couple of people dressed up as George and Martha Washington. Lots of people who like guns. I've been there a couple of years in a row, and last year it was just the fruitcakes, and it was tremendous fun. And Steve Bannon, This year, all of the J6ers had been let out of prison, so they were all there, which gave a sinister air to the proceedings a bit more. And also, Donald Trump's in power now, so what is said there is actually going to end up being the law. There wasn't actually that much discussion about Ukraine beyond people liked what JD Vance was saying about, okay, maybe it's every other country in the world's turn to step up and take care of themselves. We can't be the world's police, all of this, which is not necessarily what you would expect. CPAC, when it started, was Reaganite. It was a Ronald Reagan thing. They have a Ronald Reagan dinner every year, and it has very much changed to a much more isolationist, much more MAGA do. And some of the old Reaganites still go. So we kept catching up with the old Reaganites in the corridor and then going, yeah, we like where this is going, but you should just do the question we were asking everyone is, do you think Donald Trump's going to try and do a third term? And everyone's like, he's not going to do that. All the old Reaganites, he's not going to do that. And then we catch some of the young people, and then we're like, maybe. It was that sort of that sort of affair. But it was wild to be at.
Yeah.
And not just because of the chainsaw.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a good place to take the temperature of sort of maybe some of the stuff that's coming down the track. So, I mean, what do you think, everybody? How do you think Trump is doing so far? How do you think his stuff is going down well at home? If anyone who's viewing who is from the States, how do you feel about all this? Steve says, if Trump's as clever as he thinks he is, then why can he not see that creating division in the West plays right into Putin's hand? Or is that part of his plan? It's deeply worrying. There's a bit in the paper today, Steve, all about whether Trump is a Russian stooge or not, because he's giving every impression of being so. Ian says, why isn't Trump telling Putin that he's gambling with World War III? Your guess is as good as ours, but I suspect we know what's on in that particular war. Kim says Donald Trump's childish and a bully. Well, yes, unfortunately, he's also in charge. Now, speaking of the party support we got in the Republican Party there, it was his vice president, Lizzie, like you were saying, J.D. Vance, who provoked this meltdown in the Oval Office by claiming that no one had tried diplomacy before. Zelensky pushed him back on that, and that led to those explosions. That's a fairly fair reading, I think, of what happened. But Vance has been at it again. So here is a clip of an interview he did overnight with Fox News in the US. Suck this up.
The president knows that, look, if you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest.
Right. So some random country, we don't know that he's referring to Britain, but it's Britain and France that are suggesting peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, Lizzie. And Britain and France have been involved in a fair few wars, most of them with America, most of which America could not have done without our help. How is this going to go down here in Westminster when this man, Vance, he's a heartbeat away from the presidency?
Yeah, I mean, it's gone down terribly this morning already. We've seen quite a lot of politicians. There's a lot of Conservative MPs who are were in the forces, who've been coming out this morning sort of calling him a clown and saying how offensive it is to all of the British troops who lost their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting alongside the US. I mean, this statement it just shows that Vance just doesn't really know what he's talking about. So he's talking in it about this kind of minerals deal that the US wants, that Trump has been suggesting is an effective security guarantee where Ukraine signs away, its valuable mineral wealth to the US, as if that will act as a deterrent to Putin, having US workers in Ukraine, extracting rare minerals. But all it shows is that they are motivated by US economic interest above everything else, because, there's not a lot in it for Ukraine for that, apart from that, I suppose it means that there would be the US workers there and that the US would have an interest in that. But the British PM, Keir Starmer, has said that's not enough. He told MPs yesterday it wasn't enough to deter Putin. European leaders don't think it's enough either. Yeah, Vance's comments, I think, show that the US is still thinking about this minerals deal, which is what Trump wanted Zelensky to sign on Friday, which is another reason why I think Mikey's right that Vance was the one who pushed the ambush. Trump wants to get the deal. He wants that minerals deal. Yeah, I think that it shows that that's obviously still on their minds. But yeah, it's not going to help relations with Britain to suggest that the US has completely forgotten about our shared history and is totally undermining the strength of that partnership.
No, but Marshall says Trump wants to be a one world order and wants to be a dictator. And Leslie's asking whether Trump or Vance is the person in charge. This is the thing, Mikey, right? The vice president's role, traditionally in US politics, is next to non-existent. It's just decoration, isn't it? It's there to be the stand-in if the big guy falls over. You're there to go out to do things that he doesn't want to do, but you've got no constitutional power. You've got no real power in the House or anything else. Yet it was Vance that sort of took the lead in that meeting in the Oval Office at one point to talk up Trump and then to have a go at this other ally. Now, and here we are, I've got Vance again upsetting more allies, and Trump seems to be like not reeling him in. Trump is fine with this, isn't he? That's sort of surprising, I think, to a lot of people. Why would Trump want or be happy for Vance to go on the front foot like this?
I think Donald Trump is acutely aware that J.D. Vance connects him to a part of the MAGA base that isn't necessarily there's a part of his base that isn't necessarily tied to Trump, and it's more tied to the weird internet bro movement, and J.D. Vance ties him into that. So I think he gets a lot of latitude for keeping him relevant to younger people, because he thinks Trump wouldn't have got elected if he hadn't have had the youth vote. So that's the part of the youth vote they actually got. So I think that's why J.D. Vance gets a bit of latitude in that respect. I think one thing that's worth remembering as well, or sort of slightly the key to how Donald Trump is reacting to this and what he's pushing for. Sure, he wants the minerals deal. I think that's slightly secondary for him. I think the key is that in both Ukraine and to a lesser extent in Gaza, Trump just wants people to stop fighting. He doesn't really care who wins. And the reason he just wants people to stop fighting is because he's absolutely obsessed with getting a Nobel Peace Prize. What it comes down to.
Yeah.
Because Obama got one, and he thinks he deserves one.
But that scene in the Oval Office is not the way to get a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, even if
well, it isn't.
He comes back and kisses the ring and does what Trump wants and signs this mineral deal, which does, Della's pointing out, why should he when America's being so untrustworthy? But if he comes back and signs this mineral deal and then Trump manages somehow to get him and Putin to sit down and agree some kind of way that they can stop fighting, but it'll be basically to give Russia everything they want, is that going to get a Nobel Peace Prize?
No, but he thinks it will. Because it'll stop people fighting. I think that's the calculation. Ideally, he gets Ukraine to sign off on this and everyone stops fighting. If not, then he gives Putin what he wants and everyone stops fighting. And because he did it, he gets the prize. I genuinely think that's how he's thinking.
Yeah. Now, Kim says, you think Trump is turning into Putin? I think Vance is probably doing quite a good job as well. Kim, it's worth pointing out there are hundreds of British servicemen who died in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of them teenagers. There were thousands who were maimed physically or mentally and are still struggling to come to terms with the injuries that they received as a result of that. It's the taxpayer who spent billions and billions of pounds on those efforts, without which the US couldn't have done it alone. Steve says Trump is breaking the 1994 deal, where Ukraine gave up its considerable nuclear arsenal in return for security guarantees from the US, and which Russia also signed up to. Why shouldn't Trump be apologising for that? Oh, he wasn't in office then, so he doesn't have to apologise for it, I expect. Now, anyone but Grayling on Twitter says, the Vance is as welcome as Ellis attempting to intervene with his own constructive suggestions in Die Hard. Yes, that is exactly who he reminds me of, actually, including the neck beard. Thank you. Yeah, no, anyone but Grayling is not me. But anyway, what do you think, everybody? Do you think J.D. Vance, are you worried about this guy at all? He is one heartbeat away from the presidency. All it takes is another donut, and he's the one in charge. Now, today, what happened was completely superseded stuff. Yesterday, the Mirror splashed today on that, this United Kingdom, the Parliament was united behind Keir Starmer, talking about how these going to persist and support Ukraine and so on. But today, Trump has announced overnight he's pulled with immediate effect $1 billion worth of military funding for Ukraine. Now, that means arms, weapons, kit that was on its way to Ukraine and to the front line, that's going to be turned around and go back home. The stuff that's in Poland in warehouses isn't going to be sent out. It possibly means that even high-tech stuff currently in the field can't be used. The software suddenly can get remotely turned off, or the passwords get changed or whatever, and it becomes very difficult. Lizzie, This is an immediate threat, like day one threat to the Ukrainian ability to hold the line against Russia. And Europe, no matter what they want to do, they cannot replace that kit quickly enough. They cannot find that money immediately as quickly as Trump can turn it all off. So what is Europe going to do about this? Do we know yet?
Yeah, this is obviously an enormous problem because Trump has been calling on Europe to step up. You know, the PM has said he's going to increase UK defence spending, and other European countries are sort of looking at that. And there have been talks about sort of what European peacekeeping forces could do on the ground. But the immediate removal of US aid, it's, you know, any plans, any talks, then it will not be ready quickly enough for whatever that would mean. Obviously, the US has been instrumental in helping Kyiv, you know, repel Russian aggression. So I think there's going to be a lot of absolutely frantic diplomacy going on. Obviously, the PM has been speaking to Trump quite over the last few days. He'll obviously be trying, the UK will be trying with whatever levers it's got to try and convince the US not to do this. I mean, you saw this morning that European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission was talking about how Europe needs to step up and its sort of collective defence, and talking about pouring huge amounts of cash into doing this. But there's a timing problem, you know. However, it's hard to see how Europe could respond quickly enough if Trump really does pull the plug.
Exactly, it's very difficult. Now, Mikey, you know a bit more about this, but this spending was approved by Congress, wasn't it? The American Parliament rubber stamped and voted for spending this much money on that much military equipment to go and do this thing. And Trump has just suddenly pulled it. Surely it's only Congress that could block it. And what he's done is technically illegal.
Yeah. I think what we've seen in the last 6 weeks since he came to power is, on one hand, he does a lot of things at once, so there aren't enough people. So every opposition to him is spread among dozens of issues, the sort of shock and awe thing. But along with that, he's doing certain things to sort of test the boundaries of what he can get away with without anyone pushing back. So he's doing a lot of things by executive order, which are not things you can do by executive order. And because everyone's spread so super thin, then you know, no one really challenges him. If it did go to Congress, it'd probably get approved anyway, because he's got control of both houses. I don't think he's
a slim majority, isn't it? And that there are Republicans who've come out overnight and said, you know, we're not happy with pulling this funding. We're not happy with the way he's treating our allies. This isn't something they could. I mean, maybe they would still vote for it if it came to the crunch, but there is some dissent within his party about what he's doing. Is that maybe why he's not taking it to Congress? I mean, not taking it to Congress means he can do it quicker and he can threaten and I can use it to bully and all the rest of it. But it's a bit performative. Is maybe not taking it to Congress because it will just promote party splits?
I don't think he's thinking it through to that extent. I think he's genuinely, well, I want to do this, so I'm just going to do that. And if someone tries to stop me, then fine, we'll get into a fight about it. That's how he's taken every other issue that he's made a decision on, is that I'm going to do this by fiat. And if someone tries to stop me, then we'll get into that conversation later. But I don't think he's calculated much further down the line than that.
No, well, there we are. We're up against someone who's not thinking it through, and we've got a prime minister who does think everything through, and it doesn't seem to be going his way, which doesn't make any sense. So inside the paper today, we've got a spread that's headlined "Rage of Trump," and this is when our Prime Minister Keir Starmer goes to Parliament, updates them on what's going on, gets support from the opposite party. They're all reaching across the aisle, as they say in the States, and making friendly with him, saying he hasn't put a foot wrong, and promising them a vote if British troops are ever going to put boots on the ground. That's what you do in a parliamentary democracy. Now, speaking of what Trump has the power to do and what he's not been doing, let's shift this focus a bit, because, you know, Trump has not been doing that at all in the US. Let's go ahead and look at how popular he really is back home. So all this sound and fury about Ukraine, we're not really looking at this other stuff. He's done a very good job, of course, of making Europe hate him, but does everybody else feel the same way? There's been some polling out in the US overnight. CBS News is reporting that the majority of Americans are not okay with how Trump is handling pretty much everything. So 52%, so here we are. So his changes to US relationships with other countries, 42% think it is for the worse. Only less than a third think it's for the better, and about a quarter saying it's too soon to say. There is another sort of question in the poll in which is showing, I think 52% are showing a slim majority are in support of Ukraine in this particular conflict. They're 52% backing Ukraine, 44% neither each way, but only 4% are supporting Russia. And yet the poll also found that, it's Russia that they think Trump is really coming out for, even though that's really not matched at all in the country. And 67% want the US to work with its allies, not have all these massive rows. 82% want him to focus on the economy and then inflation, taxes, spending, crime. They're not, the top priorities here, Mikey, are not in any way Ukraine. It's the economy, it's inflation, it's taxes. Those were the biggest things on the floor at CPAC as well, were they? Or was it a bit more mad than that?
I mean, CPAC's always a culture war nightmare. They don't talk a lot about tax and spend because they'd all just say the same thing. We want to spend less, we want to tax people less.
We want to have no taxes.
We want to have no taxes at all. In the campaign when I was over ahead of the election, I remember there being a big thing in Trump's campaign that his campaign people were trying to push him towards the economy the whole time because that was what their polling was showing everyone cared about, right? And Trump was adamant that he was going to go in on immigration, and that was what he was going to hit really, really hard. And there's a bit of false memory, I think, about what Trump campaigned on. Oh, yeah, he went hard on the economy. He didn't. I went to several of his speeches, and the thing you came away with was, Mexicans are going to kill your kids. That was the big focus of all of his speeches. I think that has broadly carried over. The immigration stuff isn't really landing, which is lucky because he's not doing a very good job of delivering on what he said he was going to do in that respect. The economy stuff and the public spending stuff is actually polling quite well. So Doge, the Elon Musk ridiculous firing everyone spree, is pretty popular currently in the States. I think there's a group of people who are worried about the precedent that it is setting, and I think I think Trump made a sort of coalition of people who are angry about immigration, people who wanted their shopping to be cheaper, and people who are angry about culture wars issues. And all of them really, the biggest of them was the sort of wanting your shopping to be cheaper. I think there will come a reckoning later in his presidency when people work out that being mean to trans kids is not going to make your shopping cheaper, because that's all he was going to concentrate on. He wasn't going to make people's shopping cheaper because nothing he's doing is going to do that. As far as his base is concerned, there's a really interesting subplot which hasn't really been picked up over here yet, but there was a really interesting subplot last week while Starmer was in the White House. The Attorney General released the Epstein files, which were a bunch of binders of already publicly available information about Jeffrey Epstein that were handed to a bunch of MAGA influencers, so like TikTok people, I think libs of TikTok, this awful. Anyway, they got them and they looked through them and realised it was all guff that was already out there and they'd been had by the White House. And so the MAGA movement, or the influencers at the top of the MAGA movement, are kind of turning in on themselves anyway. So there's this massive row at in sort of the heart of what is making it like a viable movement, and it's kind of turning in on itself. So that I think that's a fascinating thing to watch. It implode on itself while Trump is doing all of this stuff kind of oblivious to what's happening to his own base.
Angry people getting angry with each other. Surprise.
Yes,
when when you've got something to point all your anger at together, which is getting our guy in the White House, you can focus that. Once he's in there, it all just sort of falls apart and they start being angry with each other a bit. Lizzie, there's some other stuff going on in the stage which isn't really being reported here, not being picked up much. So, I mean, he's got a host of domestic problems. He's got, this biggest one is the economy. He's got issues with a measles outbreak. He's got issues with bird flu, which is drastically affecting the price of eggs and therefore groceries and therefore inflation. This week, he's doing tariffs on some of his main suppliers, so us, but Canada and Mexico as well, which are all preparing to hit back. And that means people are already talking about the world's biggest economy spiraling into a recession. Is that going to take us in as well, if that happens?
I think anything that happens to America is going to impact on us in some way, because we do so much trade with them. Obviously, our economies are linked. The tariff stuff is really concerning, particularly because, the UK, it's really unclear where he sees the UK in all of this, because Trump really hates sort of feeling hard done by in trade, and he's really angry about, countries where there is, where the US is buying way more from abroad than it is selling. And it's really tricky to pin down, because I spent a while the other week looking at this. The UK and the US record their trade differently, so both have a different idea on what the situation is. The UK thinks that we have a balanced relationship with the US, that we sell about as much as we export, but Trump thinks something totally different and has started sort of saying that there's a big problem there. And he's also been talking a lot about retaliatory tariffs against things like VAT. So it's really hard to know where he sees the UK in this. Starmer tried to talk to him about it at the White House, and during the kind of public facing stuff in the Oval Office in the press conference, he was making sort of warm noises about the UK, but actually we've had no firm commitments that the US isn't going to put tariffs on trade with the UK, which would have a massive impact on our economy and would drive up prices here. And, I think Trump clearly, he's talking so much about tariffs, but it's going to drive up prices at home. And as Mike has been saying, obviously the economy was a big part of kind of what people are looking for from him. So his plan is very chaotic. It's quite hard to see what the strategy is beyond what he just thinks is fair and unfair.
Yeah, well, not much plan at all, or strategy. It seems to be just things happening one after another, which is the sort of the sense I think most people are probably getting. Cliff says the US is nothing without the rest of us. Richard on Twitter says that Trump is conflating the idea of an end to the killing with peace, because they're not necessarily the same things. I suppose we've also got this one issue I want to move on just domestically. Mikey, maybe you can explain a bit. There's been some threats of what's known in the US as a government shutdown, which is when the money that Congress has authorized for something sort of runs out, but the government has to keep on functioning, and suddenly there isn't the money to do it. And they have this period where perhaps government employees kind of all go home and don't get any work done. But that's kind of what Elon Musk is trying to do anyway. There's this threat of shutdown quite regularly, isn't there, in domestic US politics? Is it likely to happen, or are they going to find some way through it? Because he's got to get his budget and his tax cuts through as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it could happen. I don't think Trump is afraid of letting it happen. The way it happens is they have to have their budget reauthorized periodically. And if Congress can't agree to reauthorize a particular bill that has the budget in it, then the funding ends and everyone goes home. And it is literally everyone goes home. Everyone who works for the government downs tools. And you really only have, even in the White House, you only have like the political people around. There's an episode of The West Wing that explains this very well. But yeah, I mean, it could happen. It's happened a number of times in my lifetime, and it's really it ends up being sort of a bit of gamesmanship as far as Congress is concerned. Less likely because of how Trump's got control of both houses, but it's possible.
Right. We'll just deal with this comment before it gets deleted and thrown in the bin where it belongs. Snowy Owl, possibly not their real name, erroneously states America gave $350 billion to Ukraine, 2 or 3 times more than the whole of Europe has given. Thank you, Ivan, for your interjection. But America did not give $350 billion. It's given about 100 and something billion, and Europe has given more. So go away. Now, the question is where all of this ends up and where we go next. Lizzie, Trump has kind of let it be known that if Zelensky comes back, kisses the ring, does a little dance for him, that, you know, he'll forgive it all and will sign the minerals deal. Is Zelensky going to do that? Because it would be so damaging to Ukraine, never mind his standing. Or there's talk even that he might sort of stand down and let someone else be Ukrainian president and go back and do the kissing the ring business, if that's going to make Trump a little bit happier and maybe get his American support. What do you think is going to happen? What were you hearing?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, Zelensky has said that he is prepared to stand down as leader if that is what it takes to get peace. And I think that he is aware, and I think there was an awareness amongst sort of British diplomats and stuff like that, there's an animosity between him and Trump, that Trump particularly didn't like, I can't remember when it was, quite recently, when Zelensky used the word, said Trump was sort of relying on disinformation, which we all know to be true, because Trump is basically...
I think that was only over the weekend. It just seems so long ago.
It was a long time ago. But I think that was part of what triggered his Zelensky's a dictator rant, was that he was really annoyed that Zelensky basically called him out for parroting Kremlin lines on everything. And so that has kind of reignited the animosity there. So that is obviously something that is at play. Zelensky's also got his own base. You know, there is not going to be an election in Ukraine at the moment because they've suspended them under martial law. But Zelensky is representing, you know, Ukrainians who are fighting on the front line, and he's got to go on the world stage and speak for them. And I can't imagine that a lot of Ukrainian fighters would have felt great if he'd gone and sort of groveled to Trump and given everything away. You know, people are giving their lives for this. So he's got to tread a really kind of delicate balance of trying to find a way to get Trump to step back from this most extreme rhetoric and try and find a way through it, whilst also kind of speaking up for the people in his country who are giving everything to repel Russia.
There's a bit of backstory to Trump and Zelensky as well.
Yes, take us through that.
Cast your mind back to what, 2020? Trump's first impeachment, which was about a phone call between him and Zelensky, which
he was banging on about that in the Oval Office, wasn't he? Yeah.
So there was this phone call where Trump was trying to withhold aid from Ukraine unless Ukraine agreed to investigate Hunter Biden. And this was the subject of his first impeachment. That was the cause of his first impeachment. So,
well, not just investigate Hunter Biden, find the evidence that Hunter Biden had done he hadn't actually done.
So this is, I mean, Donald Trump, definitely a man who holds a grudge. I think a lot of this is about taking revenge for Zelensky not doing what he said X years ago and causing him all sorts of bother during the end of his first presidency. I don't think it's going to be enough for Zelensky to go back and say sorry and say thank you and all this and beg and plead now. I think Trump only goes back to the minerals deal if Zelensky steps down, and I would be amazed and saddened if that were to happen.
Yeah, it would, but I think that's the only hand that Zelensky's got is the minerals that Trump wants. And if he doesn't sign the deal with Zelensky, then Russia's going to get them just by invading the country. So that's the one hand he's got. The other thing is, if Zelensky does stand down, one of the people in the front running to take over the role of president would be the mayor of Kyiv, which is the former heavyweight boxer Vitaly Klitschko, who I would love to see standing next to Donald Trump and absolutely intimidating him like Giant in the Gladiators. It'd be fantastic. He wouldn't shout over Vitaly, I don't think. Where's this going to go then. So, what happens with Starmer, Lizzie? Where does he go now? Because he's put not a foot wrong, as the Tories were telling him yesterday. Everything has gone quite well from his perspective, but it still hasn't worked. And he's thought this all through, and he's friends with Trump, and it's still not working. And we're now in a situation where he's even losing support in his own party because of the aid cuts to pay for the defence that isn't enough to fill up the gap that Trump has left behind. So what can Starmer really do now?
So I think his strategy for the next few days, obviously everything is changing so fast that things could change again. But his strategy over the next few days is he got all the European leaders in London on Sunday, and they've agreed to come up with some sort of plan to present to the US about kind of enforcing peace, protecting peace in Ukraine. So there was some conversations yesterday. I think it's being led by Britain and France mostly, but there's lots of conversations going on. There's going to be a European Council summit on Thursday, and I think some sort of call perhaps between leaders later in the week. One of the things that France has been floating is a sort of limited ceasefire, 1 month long. The UK doesn't seem sure yet whether that's something we support, but it's one of the things on the table. And so I think he's going to try and basically keep in close contact with Trump, keep presenting himself as the bridge between Europe and the US, try and present himself as a sort of reasonable, honest broker. Trump can do business with him, and he can kind of corral European leaders to do what Trump wants or Trump needs, and he'll try and position it that way. And then he'll have conversations with European leaders about what this plan could look like for a sort of future peace in Ukraine, and what they can do to, if the US, take the nuclear option and walk away completely. Starmer's kind of trying to cast himself as a leader there, that Britain can really lead this. And so I think that's kind of going to be his big focus. And then on the kind of political side of it, he has taken quite a lot of flack from certain parts of the party on the decision to slash the foreign aid budget to increase defence spending. There's going to be rows about that. I mean, I think overall, the decision is very popular with the public. I think a poll yesterday showed that 2/3 of people support the decision. There is quite a lot of public support for Ukraine in this country compared to what you saw in that polling from the US. In general, you can see the way the Conservatives are rowing in behind this. Everybody's basically ganging up on Nigel Farage, who's the only person who's left sort of supporting the Trump position. The Tories, most of the right in the UK are supportive of Ukraine. So I think he'll just kind of try and drown out the noise on that and carry on, because they aren't going to, they've made this decision now on the foreign aid budget, and there's a lot of concern about it. Aid charities rightly say that it's going to be so damaging to the world's most vulnerable people that, removing aid from countries can make them more unstable. It can also drive up the number of people fleeing their homes and trying to get to the UK through small boats, all of that sort of coming to Europe. So there is a huge downside to that decision, but I think Starmer has made it. And I think criticism from his party is not necessarily going to change that in this moment.
No, so Starmer's going to keep ploughing on then and hoping for the best. Mikey, is there any chance that Trump is going to have to walk some of this back, that he wants that mineral deal, that he wants to be able to say he did a great deal and got peace, that he wants that Nobel Prize, that his voters are further away from him on this than on other things? Is he going to have to try and actually be a little bit more like what the voters want and what the majority of people on the planet want, which is just to have peace, but not at this cost? Is he going to have to walk it back a bit, do you think, or is that just never going to happen?
I don't think so. I don't think he can. I think he went he went so hard on the day, and he rallied so many supportive Republicans behind him on the day, and they went so hard in support of what he was doing and what he was saying, that he's walked so many people up a hill on this that he can't walk back down. I don't think he can, unless Zelensky goes. I think that would be the thing that is it's different now. We can talk.
That would provide cover.
I think that's the only scenario in which Trump backs down. I think it's much more likely that Trump rows in behind Putin. I think that's what's going to happen.
And Lizzie, do you think Zelensky's going to go?
I honestly don't know. I think Mikey's right that, you know, the animosity between Trump and Zelensky, at least from the Trump side, is well, you know, it's been around for a long time, and I don't see how that relationship, you know, suddenly is rebuilt. Also, Trump just doesn't really care about Ukraine. So, you know, I think it's going to be hard, whoever is leading Ukraine, to try and convince him of that, unless, you know, Ukraine or Europe can appeal to his interest in some way. But he doesn't seem worried about Putin. He doesn't see Putin as a threat, clearly, to the US. So hard to say.
Gosh, well, thank you for taking us through that, both of you, and explaining it in such detail with your expertise. It's much appreciated, and it gives our viewers a chance to learn stuff they wouldn't get just from just tuning into the news as we do during the day. So thank you very much. Donald Trump is making a speech tonight to the US Congress on how he's bringing back the American dream / nightmare / hellscape, whatever you think it may be. I dare say that'll be in the papers tomorrow. And let's all bear in mind, everybody, he's been in office for 43 days. Got years of this coming yet, and I'm sure we'll have you back again. Thank you, Mikey. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We will see you again on Thursday this week for a news agenda with our columnist Kevin Maguire, and whatever the hell has happened between now and then. So we'll see you then. Till then, everybody, stay safe, take care, tatty bye.